Father's journey to healing. What do you do when your 6-year-old daughter stops speaking and starts swallowing pieces of her past? When the doctor tells you she ingested part of a broken music box because she was terrified of forgetting her mother's voice forever. This isn't just another sad story. This is about a man who discovered that sometimes the deepest love speaks in whispers, not shouts. Picture this. It's an ordinary Tuesday morning in Indiana. The sky is that perfect shade of gray where you can't tell if it's going to rain or shine. Parents are shuffling their kids into a small community clinic for routine checkups. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. Just another day in small-town America. But inside examination room 3, something was about to unfold that would change 2 lives forever. Dr. Evelyn Walsh had been treating children for 15 years. She'd seen it all. Scared kids who hid behind their parents' legs, defiant toddlers who screamed at the sight of a stethoscope, shy children who whispered their symptoms like secrets. But the little girl who walked into her office that morning? She was different. 6-year-old Aubrey Mitchell moved like she was carrying the weight of the world on her tiny shoulders. She wore a purple dress that swayed with each careful step, her arms wrapped protectively around her stomach. Her hazel eyes never met the doctor's gaze. Instead, they stayed fixed on the floor tiles, counting patterns that only she could see. Dr. Walsh had trained herself to notice everything. The way a child held their body, the micro-expressions that flashed across their faces, the silence that often screamed louder than words ever could. And Aubrey's silence? It was deafening. Her father, Derek Mitchell, stood nearby like a man bracing for impact. His baseball cap was worn thin from too many worried nights, his hands calloused from work that barely paid the bills. There was exhaustion written in every line of his face, the kind that comes from fighting battles you're not sure you can win. "She's been having stomach pain," Derek had explained earlier, his voice rough like gravel. "Nothing too serious, but I thought we should get it checked out." Dr. Walsh nodded, but something felt off. It wasn't medical intuition exactly. It was deeper than that. The kind of knowing that comes from years of seeing children who hurt in ways that can't be measured with instruments. She tried talking to Aubrey gently, using the soft, practiced tone that usually coaxed even the shyest children into conversation. But Aubrey only nodded or shook her head, never once speaking. Her silence wasn't defiance or fear. It was something more deliberate, more protective. The examination started routinely enough. Temperature normal. Heart rate steady. Blood pressure fine. But when Dr. Walsh pressed the stethoscope against the child's stomach, Aubrey flinched. Not dramatically, just a subtle tightening of her small shoulders. It lasted barely a second, but Dr. Walsh caught it. "Does that hurt, sweetie?" she whispered. Aubrey's head moved slowly from side to side, but her hands never moved from where they cradled her belly, like she was guarding something precious and fragile. Dr. Walsh's concern deepened. She glanced at Derek, who seemed lost in his own thoughts, staring out the window as if searching for answers in the parking lot beyond. "How long has she been having the pain?" Dr. Walsh asked, keeping her voice casual. Derek shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hard to say. Maybe a week. She doesn't complain much. Keeps to herself, especially since." He stopped himself mid-sentence. The silence filled in the blanks he couldn't say out loud. "I'd like to do a quick ultrasound," Dr. Walsh said with a gentle smile. "Just to rule out anything unusual. Nothing to worry about." Derek nodded, relief flickering across his face that someone else was taking charge, that someone else might have answers. Aubrey was quietly compliant as they prepared her for the scan. Dr. Walsh kept talking, explaining each step like she was telling a bedtime story. The machine hummed to life, casting ghostly gray light across the monitor as the cool gel spread across the girl's skin. At first, everything looked normal. Dr. Walsh traced the outlines of organs, noting nothing alarming. But then, just below the liver, something glinted back at her. A hard edge. Not organic. Not normal. Her breath caught, but her hands remained steady. It was rectangular, small, metallic. Too defined to be a harmless calcification. It looked almost sharp. Years of training had taught her that children watched everything, even when they pretended not to. So she smiled gently and turned to the nurse nearby. "Could you ask Mr. Mitchell to step outside for just a moment?" she said quietly. The door clicked shut behind him. Dr. Walsh turned back to Aubrey, who was now looking at her for the first time since entering the room. The child's eyes were rimmed with tears, not from physical pain, but from something deeper. Anticipation. Shame. Fear. "Sweetheart," Dr. Walsh said, her voice gentle as a lullaby, "can you tell me what's in your tummy?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Aubrey's bottom lip trembled, her wide eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Then, in a voice barely audible, she whispered, "Something shiny. Something to remember." The words fell heavy in the sterile air. Dr. Walsh nodded slowly, her heart hammering beneath her calm exterior. "What kind of shiny thing, honey?" A long pause. Then, "From Mommy's necklace. The part that made music." A single tear slid down Aubrey's cheek. "I didn't want Daddy to be sad. It was broken. He gets sad about broken things." Dr. Walsh's throat tightened. She had to pause to collect herself, her hand still gently holding the ultrasound probe in place. This wasn't just a foreign object. It was intentional. A child's desperate attempt to preserve something fragile, a memory made tangible, ingested in silence and born alone. Outside the examination room, Derek paced slowly while Nurse Jenkins offered polite conversation that he barely heard. His mind was spinning through worst-case scenarios, each one worse than the last. When Dr. Walsh emerged moments later, her face calm but her eyes alert, Derek straightened like a soldier called to attention. "There's something in her stomach," she explained carefully. "A metallic object. We'll need to remove it surgically. It's potentially dangerous." Derek's face turned the color of ash. "A metal. What? I don't. Wait." His voice broke. "The locket. She had this music locket from her mom. It went missing months ago. I thought. During the move. I thought it got lost." Dr. Walsh guided him gently down the hall, her voice a soft current carrying him through the shock. "She said she found it," Dr. Walsh explained, "and swallowed part of it because it was broken and she didn't want you to be sad." Derek stopped walking. He pressed his palms against his eyes, his shoulders trembling. "She's just a little girl," he said, his voice cracking like ice. "How could I not see? I thought I was keeping it together. I thought." Dr. Walsh didn't answer. Some things didn't require words, only understanding. By the time they reached the surgical floor, the hospital machinery was already shifting into motion. Forms were being filled, nurses called, protocols activated. Child Protective Services would need to be notified. A social worker would be dispatched. But beneath all the ticking machinery of systems and regulations, a deeper current moved. A child's silent grief, a father's fractured hope, and a doctor's unwillingness to look away. In room 402, Aubrey lay beneath a pale hospital blanket, her hands once again folded across her stomach. Not guarding against pain anymore, but guarding memory. A piece of a song that no longer played. A piece of her mother. A piece of herself. Now, there are things a man learns to swallow in silence. Pride, mostly. Regret, too. Sometimes it's anger, the kind that burns from somewhere deep in the gut and works its way into the back of the throat, only to be pressed down again and again until it becomes just another part of the body. Derek Mitchell knew all about that kind of swallowing. He'd been doing it since the day Sarah left. It had started with the sound of a chair being pulled out in the early morning, then the zip of a suitcase, low like a whisper in the dark. When he woke up, the house had felt emptier somehow, like all the air had been sucked out through invisible cracks. Aubrey was still asleep, curled up beneath her purple blanket. Sarah had left a note. No goodbye kiss, no whisper of explanation. Just a single sheet of lined paper torn from the notepad by the fridge. She needed space. She needed to find herself. She needed something else, something that wasn't this life. He'd stood there in the kitchen, the morning light making everything too visible, too real. The clock ticked louder than usual. A coffee cup still sat in the sink, half-filled. For a moment, he'd simply stood there, unable to breathe. Weeks passed. The layoffs came not long after. The factory that had once echoed with the hum of machines and shouted instructions fell silent. One by one, workers disappeared. Laid off. Let go. Phased out. Derek tried not to be bitter, tried to believe that life wasn't intentionally cruel, just indifferent. They sold the house. There was no way to keep it without Sarah's income or his steady shifts. He packed up what they could carry, stored what they couldn't, and took Aubrey to Willow Creek Trailer Park. The name made it sound nicer than it was. No willows, no creek. Just rows of aluminum boxes that clattered when the wind blew. Their trailer was small, a borrowed thing with a persistent leak above the kitchen sink and floors that tilted slightly to the left. But it was theirs, for now. Aubrey had a tiny room with one window and a faded curtain that still smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. Derek slept on the couch. He told her it was an adventure, like camping. She had smiled the first night, then never mentioned it again. Aubrey hadn't asked about her mother after that. Not once. She had grown quieter each week, her words shrinking into whispers, her songs fading to silence. She used to sing while brushing her teeth, a little hum that drifted through the thin walls. Now she simply did what she was told, ate what was given, slept without complaint. There had been a day weeks before the hospital, when Derek came home from the night shift to find her asleep on the couch, clutching the broken remains of Sarah's musical locket. It had been something delicate once. A silver circle with tiny gears inside that played a lullaby when twisted. He had placed it on a high shelf after it cracked, intending to fix it someday, somehow. She had found it. He remembered prying it gently from her small hands, afraid the jagged edge might cut her skin. She hadn't stirred, but now, in retrospect, he wondered. Had that been the night she swallowed it? Had that been the moment his daughter decided that memory was something worth hiding inside herself? The guilt was an anchor, heavy and relentless. He worked double shifts now. Morning at the gas station, stocking shelves and checking oil levels, evening at the warehouse, lifting crates until his back ached and his fingers went numb. Sleep came in patches. Meals were whatever could be made in 15 minutes or less. He told himself it was temporary, that he was rebuilding. Mrs. Patel from the next trailer overwatched Aubrey after school. An older woman with deep-set eyes and a perpetually tired voice. She had 3 cats and a husband who rarely spoke. Aubrey didn't talk about her much. Derek figured that meant she wasn't terrible, just forgettable. Still, something about the way Aubrey had stared at those floor tiles in Dr. Walsh's office haunted him. He sat now in the hospital's waiting lounge, hunched over with his elbows on his knees, fingers knotted together like they were holding something fragile. A coffee cup sat untouched beside him, growing cold. Nurses passed by, their steps soft against the linoleum, their voices hushed. Derek heard none of it. What he heard was his daughter's whisper, that phrase that Dr. Walsh had repeated to him moments earlier. Something shiny, something to remember. The words haunted him. He looked down at his hands. Rough, stained with motor oil, the nails chipped. These were not hands that held music, not anymore. These were survival hands. Fixing, lifting, providing. But not hearing. Not truly seeing. Maybe he had missed more than he thought. Maybe he had swallowed too many things of his own. Grief, fear, hopelessness. And in doing so, he had forgotten how to listen to the quiet. A shadow crossed the floor near him. He looked up. A woman stood there, older, with silver hair pulled into a neat twist and a soft green sweater draped over her shoulders. She held a paper cup in one hand and a book in the other. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked gently. Derek blinked. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, quietly, "Sure." She handed him the cup and sat beside him without invitation, though her presence was anything but intrusive. "I'm Clara Ellison," she said after a moment. "I volunteer here 3 days a week." Derek nodded slowly. "Derek Mitchell. My daughter. She's in surgery." Clara didn't offer platitudes, didn't say it would be fine. Instead, she simply nodded and opened her book, letting the silence settle comfortably between them. It was the kind of silence that didn't demand anything. He found himself grateful for it. They sat like that for a while, 2 strangers sharing space, breath, and unspoken worry. Until the hospital's overhead speaker announced the arrival of Child Protective Services. That was when his stomach clenched. That was when the real fear began. The kind of fear that had nothing to do with broken lockets or medical procedures. The kind that said they might take her. Not because he hurt her, not because he didn't care, but because sometimes being poor looked like neglect. Because sometimes tired eyes and empty refrigerators told stories louder than love ever could. The coffee turned bitter in his mouth. He set the cup down, but the bitterness remained. It had just begun. The knock on the consultation room door was soft, but its implication was anything but. Derek looked up from his clenched hands to find a woman standing just inside the threshold. She wore a slate-gray blazer, held a clipboard like a shield, and had eyes that had long since learned how to separate compassion from procedure. "Mr. Mitchell?" she asked, more a formality than a question. "I'm Melissa Bennett. I work with Child Protective Services." Derek's throat went dry. His body tensed as though bracing for impact. Bennett stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. Not unkindly, but with the finality of someone who had done this many times before. She took a seat across from him, her posture straight, her tone neutral. "I understand your daughter was brought in today for abdominal pain," she began, her words practiced and sterile, "and that an internal foreign object was discovered via ultrasound." Derek gave a small nod, unsure what to say that wouldn't sound like guilt. "She swallowed part of a broken locket," he said eventually. "Something her mother gave her before she left us." Ms. Bennett noted that on her clipboard. The pen moved efficiently, rhythmically. Derek watched it like it might hold his fate between strokes. "And when did you become aware that the locket was missing?" she asked. "I thought it got lost during our move." "That was months ago." Another note, another silent judgment. "We've recently transitioned into a temporary housing arrangement," Derek added quickly, trying to get ahead of the assumptions. "It's not permanent. I'm working 2 jobs to get us back on our feet." Ms. Bennett looked up then, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm not here to assign blame. My job is to assess risk and ensure that your daughter's environment is safe and stable." The word risk hit harder than it should have. It clung to the inside of his chest like rust. "She's not in danger," he said, his voice strained. "I love my daughter. I would never—" "I believe you," Ms. Bennett interrupted, gently but firmly. "But the fact remains. A 6-year-old child accessed a broken object, swallowed part of it, and no one noticed until she required surgery. That raises concerns." The room grew colder. Derek sat back, hands resting on his thighs, his thoughts spinning. He had been so focused on surviving that he hadn't realized how easily the system could see his best efforts as negligence. Before he could respond, a new voice entered the space. One softer, lined with age and steadiness. "Perhaps I can offer some context." It was Clara, standing at the doorway with the calm assurance of someone who had seen many storms and learned to walk through them without haste. She held no clipboard, wore no badge. Just a quiet certainty that filled the room more thoroughly than any form or policy. Ms. Bennett raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "Clara Ellison," she replied, stepping forward. "I'm a volunteer here. I've spent some time with Aubrey during her post-op recovery." The social worker regarded her for a moment, then gestured for her to sit. "I'm not family," Clara continued, "but I'm a grandmother, and I've been a teacher for over 30 years. I know the look of a child who's hurting but afraid to speak. Aubrey isn't neglected. She's grieving. And so is her father." Ms. Bennett didn't interrupt. She simply let the silence stretch, weighing the words. "I've seen kids come through this hospital who've been forgotten," Clara said. "Truly forgotten. You can tell the difference. Aubrey's hair was combed this morning. There was a friendship bracelet on her father's wrist, made by a child. The lunch receipt in his jacket pocket showed he bought her a meal but skipped one for himself. That's not neglect. That's sacrifice." Derek looked down, ashamed and yet strangely affirmed. Ms. Bennett made another note, then closed the folder. "For now," she said, "we'll need to initiate a temporary placement. Just until we've completed our evaluation of the home and confirmed Mr. Mitchell's participation in a parenting support program." Derek felt the words like a slow punch to the gut. "Where will she go?" "We have licensed foster homes available." "I'll take her." It was Clara who spoke, her voice steady. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. Just quiet conviction. "I'm a certified emergency care volunteer," she explained, producing a laminated card from her bag. "Registered with the Community Care Initiative. I've provided temporary care for children before. Aubrey already knows me. That continuity matters. Ms. Bennet examined the credentials, then nodded slowly. That would be acceptable, she said. Derek exhaled, the breath shuddering from his chest. Can I at least say goodbye? Clara reached over, gently touching his hand. You won't be saying goodbye, she said. You'll be saying see you soon. The transfer happened quickly. A bag was packed with essentials. New pajamas, a toothbrush from the nurse's station, and the small journal Clara had given Aubrey. The musical locket, now removed and resting in a plastic container, was tucked gently beside her things. Aubrey didn't cry. She held Derek's hand as they stood by the hospital exit, her other arm clutching the journal to her chest. Peanut, he whispered, crouching to meet her eyes. This is just for a little while, until Daddy gets everything ready at home. I'll see you every day, okay? She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. You're not mad? She asked, her voice as fragile as rice paper. No, sweetheart, he replied. I'm proud of you. You were very brave. And I love you more than anything. Her arms wrapped around his neck then, small and trembling. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, lavender and something faintly sugary. When they finally let go, Clara took her hand gently. Ready to see my butterfly garden? She asked softly. Aubrey nodded again, and then, without another word, she walked beside Clara to the waiting car. Derek stood there long after the vehicle had disappeared down the hospital drive. The wind was picking up, carrying with it the dry rustle of leaves. He shoved his hands into his pockets and stared at the horizon. His daughter had just been taken into someone else's care. Not because he didn't love her, but because love sometimes wasn't enough to silence the doubts of a system designed to protect. He understood the logic, but it didn't stop his heart from breaking just the same. The first morning at Clara's house was quieter than Aubrey expected. Not the kind of quiet that stretched out cold and empty like the trailer when her father was working late, but a different kind. Soft, purposeful, filled with distant bird calls and the rustle of wind against lace curtains. Clara's guest room had a white bedspread with stitched bluebells, and on the nightstand stood a ceramic lamp shaped like a lighthouse. The smell of oatmeal and honey drifted in from the kitchen, blending with the faint scent of peppermint that seemed to linger everywhere in the house. Aubrey sat at the edge of the bed, her feet dangling, her small hands still clutching the journal Clara had given her at the hospital. A lavender-colored notebook with lined pages and a gold ribbon bookmark. She hadn't written anything in it yet. The blank pages reminded her too much of questions she didn't know how to answer. Clara didn't knock when she entered. She simply opened the door gently, carrying a tray with breakfast and a glass of milk. No need to rush, she said, setting it down. I figured today we could have a slow start. Would you like to visit the butterflies after breakfast? Aubrey blinked. Are they real? She asked, her voice cautious. They're as real as memories, Clara replied with a smile, and sometimes just as shy. The backyard was not large, but it was full of life. Ferns and cracked clay pots, wind chimes that sang in uneven tones, and a small patch of milkweed and coneflowers where butterflies lingered in the morning light. Aubrey stood quietly as Clara pointed out the different wings. A monarch with frayed edges, a pale swallowtail missing half a pattern. See, Clara said softly, not perfect but still flying. Aubrey nodded, her fingers reaching out but never quite touching. Her gaze followed each flutter, not with wonder, but with something deeper. Recognition. Clara watched from a few feet away. She understood more than she let on. She had seen children arrive in her home before. Some frightened, some angry, some already hardened in ways no child should be. But Aubrey was different. She was a silent question, folded in on herself like a secret. Clara knew that the answers wouldn't come with time alone, but with trust. And trust, like butterflies, needed the right conditions to appear. Back in the kitchen, Clara showed Aubrey how to feed the sourdough starter, how to write the date on the little jar, and how to smell when it was ready. These weren't lessons with instructions. They were rhythms. And Aubrey followed them like music she remembered from long ago. She never asked about her father, but Clara could see the weight in her shoulders when the mail arrived and it wasn't for her. She could see it in the way Aubrey hesitated before choosing where to sit, always looking toward the door, always listening for footsteps that never came. At the same time, in a church basement across town, Derek sat in a metal folding chair surrounded by strangers who had all once believed they could do this alone. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant. Posters lined the walls. Messages about emotional regulation, parenting strategies, and local resources. At the front stood Colton Reyes, the program facilitator. A tall man with a salt and pepper beard and the kind of voice that didn't ask for attention but always got it. "Let's talk about guilt," Colton said that morning. "That sticky thing that clings even when you've done everything right, or at least tried to." Derek shifted in his chair, arms folded tightly. The circle of other fathers felt like a spotlight, even though no one was looking at him directly. A man across the room, thin and jittery, spoke up. "I yelled at my son last week," he said. "I don't even know why. He dropped his cereal, and I just lost it. Then I cried the rest of the night." There were nods, murmurs of understanding. Colton waited, then looked at Derek. "How about you? First time here, right?" Derek cleared his throat, uneasy. "Yeah." "Want to tell us why you're here?" He paused, then spoke slowly. "My daughter. She swallowed something. Something small, but important. It got stuck. She needed surgery." The words felt strange out loud, even though he had turned them over in his head for days. "I didn't even know it was missing," he continued. "That's the part that keeps me up. I thought I was paying attention, but apparently not." Colton nodded, not with judgment, but recognition. "Children don't always tell us in ways we expect," he said. "Sometimes they don't use words. They use silence. They use actions. Sometimes they swallow things we can't see." The room quieted again, not an uncomfortable silence, but one that held space for each man to sit with his own reflections. Derek looked down at his hands. "I just want to fix it," he said. "But I don't know how." "You're here," Colton replied. "That's the start." Later, after the session ended, Derek lingered behind. Colton approached him with a folded sheet of paper. "There's a support group on Thursdays. Smaller circle, less talk, more building. Real stuff. You might like it." Derek nodded. He didn't say thank you, but his grip on the paper was tight. That evening, he drove home past the community garden where he used to take Aubrey on Sundays. The beds were mostly empty now, the soil dry. But in the farthest corner, he noticed something unexpected. A single violet blooming in defiance of the season. He stopped the car and stared. It wasn't much, but it was something. The old music box lay disassembled on Derek's kitchen table, its pieces scattered like forgotten promises. He'd found it at a second-hand store, tucked behind a stack of cracked snow globes and unwanted picture frames. The box was mahogany, faded and chipped at the corners, with a brass winding key that no longer turned. He hadn't known exactly why he picked it up. Maybe it was the size. Small enough to fit in the palm of his hand, like the one Aubrey had swallowed a piece of. Or maybe it was the tiny ballerina figurine inside, its arms raised in a permanent pirouette, waiting for music that no longer came. He'd brought it home, placed it on the table beside a screwdriver set, and told himself it was something to do with his hands. Something to keep him from unraveling. But as the hours passed, he realized it was more than that. It was a quiet attempt to fix something that couldn't be undone. His fingers worked slowly, gingerly, prying open the tiny screws, trying not to damage the delicate gears. He had no training, no guide. Just intuition and a blurry memory of his daughter winding the old locket in their old living room, its lullaby echoing through the house like a thread stitching them together. But the box refused to play. The key was stripped, the gears rusted, the spring uncoiled like a dying thing. Derek sat back in the kitchen chair and exhaled hard. "Figures," he muttered. His eyes stung, though he told himself it was just the fluorescent light overhead. He placed the pieces carefully into a clean handkerchief and folded the fabric closed. He couldn't fix the box, not yet. But maybe it wasn't about the music. Maybe it was about trying. Across town, in Clara's backyard, Aubrey stood ankle-deep in damp soil. She held a small trowel, the handle painted with faded sunflowers. Clara knelt beside her, guiding her hands. They were planting forget-me-nots. Fragile sky-blue petals that looked like they belonged more to dreams than gardens. Clara had chosen them deliberately. "These are memory flowers," she said gently, scooping earth into the hole. "They don't grow fast, but when they bloom, they're hard to forget." Aubrey didn't answer, but her eyes followed the way Clara patted down the soil and smoothed it with care. "Sometimes," Clara continued, "the things we remember are sharp, like broken glass. But sometimes they're soft, like this dirt. You get to choose which ones you carry." Still no words. Just the slow, methodical way Aubrey pressed her palm against the mound of earth, like she was sealing something in. Later, they sat on the porch swing, sipping warm milk and watching dusk settle over the garden. The first stars blinked into view. Fireflies flitted like tiny lanterns, careless and free. Clara handed her the lavender journal again. "Maybe tonight you can draw instead of write." Aubrey opened it to a blank page and began to sketch. Slowly. Not a butterfly this time, but something with sharper lines. A box. A circle. A swirl that looked almost like a song. Meanwhile, back at the gas station, Derek's shift ended earlier than expected. The manager, a young man named Troy with too much gel in his hair and too little patience, called him into the office just as the sky was turning to ash. "We're cutting back," Troy said, avoiding eye contact. "Corporate says hours are tight." "Nothing personal." Derek nodded once. Just once. But it was the kind of nod that held back a wave. He stepped out into the cool air and sat in his truck for a long time, hands on the wheel, engine off. The silence pressed in again. The second job, his evening warehouse shift, barely covered rent. Without this, he'd fall behind again. And if he fell behind, CPS would never give Aubrey back. His phone buzzed. A text from Clara, "Forget-me-nots planted." Aubrey helped. She smiled today. Not a big smile, but real. Derek read the message twice, then again. He looked at the box pieces wrapped in the handkerchief on the seat beside him. Maybe some things didn't need to be fixed to be beautiful again. Maybe being bent didn't mean being broken. That night, he drove to a hardware store and bought a small magnifying lamp and a new set of miniature tools. Not because he knew what he was doing, but because he was learning. Learning how to rebuild. Learning how to listen. Learning, slowly, how to come back. The trailer had never been perfect. Derek knew that. It leaned slightly to the left, and when it rained, the roof sang an uneven lullaby of dripping leaks. But it was clean. Or at least it was cleaner than it had ever been before. He'd spent the last 3 nights scrubbing every surface, patching torn screens, and sealing the floorboards with adhesive from the discount store. The morning sun was sharp, cutting through the trees like a scalpel. Derek stood on the stoop in a flannel shirt and jeans that still smelled faintly of bleach. He had brushed his hair, shaved the stubble from his jaw, and tried to convince himself this was just a formality. A checkpoint. Nothing more. Then he saw the gray sedan pull up, slow and deliberate, like judgment arriving on 4 tires. Ms. Bennett stepped out first, clipboard in hand, followed by another woman. Young, brisk, with the alertness of someone trained to look for problems. She wore a navy jacket embroidered with the seal of the state and carried a digital tablet that she tapped as she walked. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," Ms. Bennett said, her tone as neutral as always. "Morning," Derek replied, stepping aside. "Come on in." The first thing they noticed was the smell. Not unpleasant, but strong. Lemon cleaner and something earthy, like cedar oil. Derek had read online that a clean smell could influence perception. The trailer was small. 2 rooms and a narrow hallway, but every surface gleamed. He had even bought a new curtain for Aubrey's room, pale yellow with tiny stars. A makeshift bookshelf stood in the corner, stacked with a few children's books he could find in decent shape at the thrift store. The CPS worker didn't speak much. She walked slowly, taking pictures with her tablet. Snap. The corner of the bathroom sink. Snap. The worn edge of the kitchen counter. Snap. The small tear in the linoleum by the refrigerator. Derek followed them in silence, his hands tightening and loosening at his sides. He wanted to explain, wanted to point out the effort, the patched leaks, the fixed lock on the door, the nightlight in the hallway that hadn't flickered once since he rewired it. But no one asked. When they reached Aubrey's room, Ms. Bennett paused. The bed was made, a small stuffed rabbit sat against the pillow, the new curtain fluttered gently from the open window. "This is nice," she said, her voice softer. She picked the curtain color, Derek said quickly. Before everything. The tablet worker tapped a few notes, then asked about the heating. There were reports of a faulty vent last winter. I installed a new unit last week, Derek said. It's electric. Safe. I've got a receipt if you want. We'll include it in the report. They continued through the trailer, their presence expanding to fill every square foot like fog. In the hallway, the inspector crouched to check the smoke detector, then stood to scribble something on her screen. Derek clenched his jaw. There was a tension in the air, thick and invisible, like waiting for a grade on a test you already knew you'd struggled through. When they returned to the small living area, Ms. Bennett closed her clipboard and looked at him. Mr. Mitchell, I can see you've made a great effort to improve the living conditions here. That's noted and appreciated. But, she hesitated. There are still concerns, she said carefully. The structural integrity of the trailer is questionable. The back door doesn't seal properly. The window in the bathroom lacks safety glass. I've got a list, Derek said, too quickly. I know what needs fixing. I need time. It's not about intent, the inspector added quietly. It's about safety. Derek felt something crack then. Not loud, not visible, but internal. Like a support beam giving way. I'm doing everything I can, he said, the words thick in his throat. I've done more in the past month than I thought I could manage. I haven't missed a shift. I started parenting classes. I fixed the goddamn roof with tar and duct tape. And you're telling me it's not enough? Ms. Bennett's gaze softened, but she didn't deny it. We don't make these decisions lightly, she said. We'll review the report. The goal is reunification, always. But we also have a duty to prioritize the child's immediate safety. He wanted to scream, to punch the wall, to tear that tablet from the inspector's hands and show her what real neglect looked like. But instead, he stood there, barely breathing, barely holding it together. After they left, the silence inside the trailer was deafening. He sat on the edge of the couch, his elbows on his knees, his breath shallow. His eyes wandered to the coffee table where the music box still sat in pieces. He hadn't touched it in days. Everything felt paused, held in a breath too long. That evening, Clara stopped by. She didn't knock, just opened the door gently and stepped inside like someone returning to a place she once lived. She carried a small brown bag and a thermos of soup. Thought you could use a break from tuna sandwiches, she said, setting the food on the counter. Derek didn't respond at first. He was still in the same position, still staring at the fragments of the music box. She sat across from him, watching. Rough day. He nodded slowly. They came to inspect. Said the place isn't safe. Said they'll review, which means delay, which means I don't get my kid back. Not now. Not soon. Clara poured soup into 2 mugs. No bowls, just mugs. The kind you held with both hands. Let me tell you something, she said after a sip. When my son was 5, our roof collapsed during a storm. Whole dining room flooded. For a week, we lived with buckets under every leak. You know what he remembers? Derek looked up. He remembers the cardboard spaceship we built out of the moving boxes, she said with a smile. He remembers pretending the thunder was a dragon. He doesn't remember the mess. Kids don't count cracks in the floor. They count how often they feel safe. Derek exhaled. I want her home. I know. I want to fix this. You are. He looked at her, eyes tired. It doesn't feel like it. That's because you're in the middle of it, Clara said. But take it from someone who's lived long enough to see broken things bend back into shape. You're doing more than you think. The church basement felt warmer that Thursday. Not because the temperature had changed, but because Derek had relaxed slightly. Enough to notice the smell of fresh coffee brewing. Enough to greet the man seated beside him with a quiet nod, not just silence. Colton stood at the front again, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a stack of note cards in his hand. This week, he said, I want to talk about what we carry and what we pass on. He handed each participant a card. On it, just one question. What did your father never say to you that you wish he had? Derek stared at it longer than he thought he would. The pen felt foreign in his hand. The words came slowly, like drops leaking from a faucet long ignored. He didn't write a sentence. Just 3 words. You are enough. When it was his turn to share, he didn't read it out loud. He just looked at Colton and said, I don't want to pass down silence. Colton nodded, as if that was more than enough. After the session, they lingered near the folding chairs, surrounded by the faint hum of the vending machine. I've been trying to fix this music box, Derek said suddenly. For my daughter. It's busted, but I keep trying. Colton smiled, that patient kind of smile that didn't press for more. It's not about the music, is it? Derek shook his head. It's about showing her I didn't stop trying. Then keep at it, Colton said. Even if it never plays. At Clara's house, the day unfolded slowly, like warm honey poured over toast. Aubrey had been quieter than usual. Not withdrawn, just thoughtful. Clara noticed the way her eyes lingered on the photo by the piano. A black-and-white snapshot of Clara's late husband sitting cross-legged on the floor with a child on his back. His name was Henry, Clara said, following Aubrey's gaze. He was a teacher too. Used to whistle while making scrambled eggs. Drove me crazy. Aubrey smiled faintly. That afternoon, Clara suggested writing letters. Not for the post office, she clarified. Just for the heart. Sometimes we don't get to say what we feel out loud, but we can still say it. Aubrey didn't ask questions. She just took the pen. She wrote slowly, carefully, stopping now and then to stare out the window. When she handed the page back, Clara didn't read it. She folded it gently and placed it in a keepsake box. For safekeeping, she said. You can give it to him when you're ready. Then that evening, the music box made a sound. It wasn't much. Just a few hesitant notes as Derek tightened a gear and nudged the spring into motion. A short, broken tune spilled into the air. Haunted, imperfect, but real. He sat still for a long time, listening. It wasn't about the melody. It was about presence. The next morning, Clara found a note taped to her screen door. Scribbled in block letters, slightly smudged by dew, Notice of Safety Inspection. County Health Office. Initiated by resident complaint. Clara's breath caught. She looked across the lot to Mrs. Patel's trailer. The curtains fluttered slightly. No movement, just stillness heavy with implication. Clara folded the notice slowly and placed it in her pocket. She didn't say anything to Aubrey. Instead, she poured 2 cups of warm milk and brought out the sketch pad. Today, she said, I want you to draw what hope looks like. Aubrey thought for a moment, then drew a box with wings. That evening, Clara called Derek. Her voice was calm, but the undertone wasn't. They're going to inspect here next week, she said. I think Mrs. Patel made a report. Derek's voice tightened. About what? She said she was worried. Too many changes, too many unstable elements. You know how people get when they don't understand something. He exhaled hard. Can they remove her? If they want to, Clara said gently. But they'll have to go through me first. There was a long pause. Thank you, he whispered. You don't have to say that, Clara replied. Just keep fixing that music box. 3 days later, Derek brought the repaired box to Colton's group. He didn't say anything as he placed it on the table and turned the key. The room fell silent as the tune began. Wobbly, imperfect, but unmistakable. It was, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Colton nodded. Sometimes, he said softly, we just need something to remind us that broken isn't the same as lost. The letter came in a plain envelope, stamped with the county seal and folded with the precision of something bureaucratically cold. Derek opened it slowly, hands slightly trembling, as if expecting the words inside to be a verdict. A final wall. But what he found was something else. A conditional extension. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to bring the trailer up to minimum safety standards. 3 weeks to prove that a life stitched together from second-hand hope could still be considered stable. 3 weeks to bring his daughter home. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't faith. It was a pause. Thin, precarious, but real. And for Derek, it was everything. He began the next morning. It started with the back door, the one that had never sealed right, letting in wind and suspicion. He removed the hinges, sanded down the frame, replaced the rotten wood with 2x4s he bought using the last of his gas money. The work was clumsy at first. His hands not quite trusting the tools, his body not yet remembering the rhythm of building. But each strike of the hammer, each turn of the drill, was a declaration, "I will not be disqualified by poverty." Then came the windows. He climbed onto the rusted step-stool, glass cleaner and caulk in hand, sealing cracks with the same care one might use to dress a wound. He reinforced the one in the bathroom with a safety film, pressing it down with steady pressure, sweat beading along his neck. By day 3, he had a list taped to the fridge, titled, "What Home Looks Like," with every bullet point CPS had mentioned, plus a few more. He crossed them off one by one. Not because it brought relief, but because the action was the only thing that made sense. At night, his muscles screamed. He wrapped his wrist with an old ace bandage, soaked his feet in a bucket of warm water, and stared at the picture Aubrey had drawn for him. 2 stick figures, one taller than the other, standing under a sky of blue stars. Clara never asked if he needed help. She just showed up. First, it was a casserole, still warm in a Pyrex dish. Then a thermos of black coffee and a folded note, "Real strength isn't loud." A few days later, she brought by an old friend. Jonas, a retired electrician who smelled of tobacco and peppermint. He replaced 2 wall outlets and rewired the breaker box while humming "Danny Boy" under his breath. "You've got good bones here," Jonas said as he packed up his toolkit. "Just need someone who gives a damn. Looks like you qualify." Derek managed a weak smile. "Trying." That night, after Jonas left and Clara returned to her garden, Derek stood in the center of the trailer, looking around. The floor still sloped slightly. The ceiling bore the faint stain of an old leak. But something had shifted. This place, this metal box that had once felt like failure, now felt like fight. And it wasn't easy. On the 10th day, while replacing a cabinet hinge, the screwdriver slipped and cut deep across the pad of Derek's hand. Blood spattered across the linoleum like punctuation marks. He cursed quietly, wrapping the wound in a dish towel, his jaw clenched. It didn't stop. He finished installing the hinge with one hand, using his knee to brace the cabinet door. When it finally clicked into place, he let himself exhale and sank to the floor, back against the wall, staring up at the ceiling. The silence pressed in again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like breath held before the first note of a song. The second visit from CPS came without ceremony. No warning, no courtesy call. Just a knock at the trailer door, sharp and rhythmless, like punctuation at the end of a long, unfinished sentence. Derek opened the door with hands still smelling of sealant and sawdust. His shirt was damp with sweat. Behind him, the kitchen window gleamed, newly framed. A fresh fire extinguisher sat mounted beside the stove. The floor, once bowed and splintered, had been covered with peel-and-stick tiles. Cheap, but clean. Ms. Bennett stepped inside with a clipboard in hand, followed by a different caseworker this time. The younger woman said nothing, just scanned the room with practiced eyes. They moved slower this time. They noticed the safety outlet caps, the child-proof locks on the cabinets, the smoke detectors blinking with steady green lights. In Aubrey's room, the curtains still fluttered gently, but now with a new tieback and a second-hand lamp that cast soft yellow light onto the nightstand. Derek didn't speak unless spoken to. He just followed, watching them catalog the things he had built, fixed, and fought for. When they were done, Ms. Bennett paused at the door. She looked at him. Really looked at him, like someone seeing a photograph for the second time and realizing what they missed the first. "You've done a lot," she said. Derek nodded. "She deserves more. But this is what I've got." The new caseworker tapped a few notes, then unexpectedly, she smiled. "She'll see it." That evening, Derek sat on the porch with the letter Aubrey had written earlier that week. It was written in crayon, each line carefully pressed into the paper. "Dear Dad, I miss you like stars miss the night. When can I come home? Love, Aubrey." The words folded something inside him. It wasn't sadness, exactly. It was a kind of ache only a father could know. The ache of being loved by someone who didn't care whether your house leaned or your paycheck was late. Only that you were there. He stared at the page for a long time, then slowly picked up a pen and wrote, "Soon. Not because they say yes, but because I won't stop until they do." Love, Dad. He sealed the letter, pressed it against his chest for a moment, then slipped it into the box Clara had sent over. The one with sunflowers on the lid and a note that read, "For the conversations you're not allowed to have yet." The music box sat on the table once more. This time, it was whole. Derek had replaced the broken key, sanded the surface, and realigned the tiny ballerina inside. He wasn't sure what he expected, but when he turned the crank, the sound that emerged stopped him mid-breath. A full melody. Soft, wobbly, but complete. The ballerina spun slowly, arms lifted in a perfect arc. Derek closed his eyes and listened. It was, "You Are My Sunshine." He let it play until the final note faded into silence, then placed the box into a small pouch and tucked it into his coat pocket. It would be the first thing he gave her when she came home. Not because it was perfect, but because it had survived. Just like them. The call came just after dawn. Derek had been awake for hours, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold. He didn't notice the sun filtering through the curtains, didn't hear the bird song outside the window. His thoughts had been fixed on a single phrase looping like static, "She might come home." When the phone rang, he nearly dropped it. "Mr. Mitchell." Ms. Bennett's voice, calm as ever. "I'm calling to inform you that the board has approved a 30-day reunification trial, effective immediately." There was a beat of silence on the line. Then, quietly, "Aubrey can come home today." Derek didn't speak at first. The words sat in his chest like a warm weight. Real, heavy, terrifying. "Thank you," he managed. "She'll need regular check-ins. Weekly wellness reports. In-home visits. But we believe she's ready." No, he thought. I'm the one who had to get ready. He spent the next hour cleaning things that were already clean, straightening picture frames, readying the curtain cords. He reheated coffee, poured it down the sink, then made a fresh pot and didn't drink a drop. At exactly 10 o'clock, he pulled into Clara's driveway. The house looked smaller than he remembered, though nothing had changed. The butterfly garden was still in bloom, coneflowers nodding gently in the breeze, the milkweed dancing like it knew something he didn't. Aubrey stood at the top of the porch steps, wearing a red hoodie and holding her lavender journal. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, slightly crooked. Her shoes didn't match. She looked perfect. Derek stepped out of the truck, suddenly unsure of what to say. He had imagined this moment 100 different ways. Confetti, laughter, tears. But now that it was here, he just stood there. "Hi, Peanut," he said, voice low. Aubrey didn't say anything. She just ran. Her arms wrapped around his middle with the urgency of a child who had been holding her breath. He dropped to his knees and held her tight, his fingers sinking into the fabric of her hoodie like he needed it to anchor him. "I missed you," she said, muffled against his chest. "I missed you more," he whispered. When they pulled apart, she held out her journal. "I drew you something." He flipped through until he found the latest page. A picture of 2 stick figures standing beneath a house. Above them, in a child's careful handwriting, was one word, "safe." Derek swallowed hard. From the porch, Clara watched silently. She didn't interrupt, just smiled, her hands resting on the wooden railing like prayer. "I have something for you too," Derek said, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out the small pouch and opened it carefully. Inside, the music box gleamed softly. He turned the key and let it play. "You Are My Sunshine," the notes whispered, steady and whole. Aubrey's eyes widened. "You fixed it." He nodded. "And it still works." She took it gently, holding it like something sacred. From the doorway, Clara cleared her throat. "I packed a few things," she said. "Journal, toothbrush, the plant she named Charlie. And some of those cookies you like, Derek. The oatmeal ones you pretend are healthy." Derek chuckled softly, then looked at her. Really looked. "Thank you for everything." "You're not done," she said. "Just further along." She walked over and kissed Aubrey on the forehead, then placed a gentle hand on Derek's shoulder. "Remember what I told you," she added. "Broken isn't the same as lost." That afternoon, Derek sat on the couch while Aubrey colored at the kitchen table. The music box rested beside her crayons, the ballerina spinning slowly. He watched her, memorizing every movement. When she looked up and asked if he'd brush her hair, He nodded. She sat cross-legged on the floor, and he combed through the tangles gently, the way Sarah used to. Clara's words echoed in his mind. What they remember isn't the mess. It's the moments. He hoped that this was one she'd remember. The garden looked different in the late afternoon light. Clara had laid out a simple picnic on the patch of grass behind her porch. Folding chairs, a checkered blanket, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and lemonade in chipped mason jars. Nothing fancy, but it felt like a celebration. Not loud, not exaggerated. Just soft joy, the kind that doesn't announce itself but lingers. Aubrey sat beside Clara, knees pulled to her chest, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Derek sat across from them, his back resting against the old oak tree, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand. They didn't talk much. There was no need. Butterflies danced above the milkweed. The breeze smelled of basil and something faintly sweet. Maybe those oatmeal cookies Clara had baked again. After the meal, Aubrey wandered toward the garden bed she'd planted with Clara. The one with the forget-me-nots. She crouched down, touching one of the blooms gently, like greeting an old friend. "She talks to the flowers sometimes," Clara said quietly. Derek smiled, eyes following his daughter. "They listen better than people." Clara handed him a small envelope, slightly wrinkled at the edges. "She asked me to keep this until the right time. I think that's now." Derek opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in quarters. Aubrey's handwriting, curved and slightly uncertain, but deliberate. "Dear Dad, sometimes I was scared you wouldn't fix it. But then I saw how hard you tried, and I wasn't scared anymore. Even when it was quiet, even when you were gone, I think I'm strong too. Like you. Love, Aubrey." Derek's throat tightened. He folded the letter back carefully, reverently. There were no words big enough to contain what he felt in that moment. Only the silent thud of his heart and the way the world seemed to slow down. He looked at Clara. "I don't know how to thank you." "You just did," she said softly. Aubrey came bounding back, a forget-me-not between her fingers. She tucked it into Derek's shirt pocket without a word, then sat beside him and leaned her head against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head. The sun was dipping lower, the garden washed in gold. Aubrey looked up at him and asked, "We're safe now, right?" Derek paused, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to say it in a way that would last. "Yes," he said at last. "Not perfect, but safe. And that's more than enough." The music box sat nearby, unopened. It didn't need to play tonight. Its song had already begun. 3 months later, the house was quiet again. But this time, the quiet wasn't heavy. It wasn't the hollow kind that echoed against walls or settled into corners like dust. It was soft, content. The kind of silence that follows laughter or precedes the start of something beautiful. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting warm squares of light across the counter. Derek stood barefoot, a cup of coffee in one hand, watching the toaster tick. He still used the same mug, the chipped blue one with a faded eagle on the side. But these days, it stayed full long enough to cool. In the hallway, the sound of shuffling feet. Aubrey appeared in her school uniform, hair still slightly messy from sleep, but her eyes alert. She carried her backpack by one strap and her lunchbox dangled from the other hand. "You forgot your socks," Derek said, nodding toward her bare ankles. Aubrey grinned. "They're in my shoes." He laughed, a deep, quiet sound. "Genius." She sat at the table, flipping open her lavender journal. The same one Clara had given her. It was nearly full now, the pages bent at soft edges, colored with crayon and ink. Clara arrived shortly after, carrying a loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil. "Payment," she said, setting it on the counter, "for letting me win at Scrabble last night." "You spelled zeal with 2 E's, Derek reminded her. "I spelled it with heart," Clara replied. They all sat together, the way they did most Saturday mornings now. There were no big announcements, no questions about the past or warnings about the future. Just the smell of bread, the clink of mugs, and the unspoken understanding that something fragile had not only survived but grown. Across the room, the music box rested on a high shelf. It hadn't been played in weeks. Not because it was forgotten, but because they didn't need it anymore. The song lived in the walls now. In the way Aubrey hummed while brushing her teeth, in the way Derek tucked her in with a whispered line of lyrics, in the steady rhythm of a home rebuilt from silence. Clara watched them for a moment, then opened a book she carried under her arm. She read aloud, not dramatically, just enough to let the words settle in the air like dust motes. Perhaps the butterfly is proof that you can go through a great deal of darkness and still become something beautiful. Derek looked at Aubrey. She didn't look broken anymore. She looked like sunlight through leaves. She looked like strength. And for the first time in a long time, he believed that maybe he did too. As Clara closed the book, Aubrey stood and slipped on her shoes, socks already tucked inside as promised. She turned to Derek, backpack over her shoulder. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded, grabbing his keys. At the door, she paused and looked back at the room. The kitchen, the table, the box. Then she smiled. "We're still okay, right?" Derek placed a hand on her head, gently smoothing her hair. "We're better than okay," he said. "We're beginning." She stepped outside into the light, her feet crunching softly on the gravel path. Behind her, the door closed. Not with a slam, not with a squeak. Just a quiet, gentle click. Sometimes, the most powerful repairs happen in silence. Not with grand gestures or perfect answers, but in the quiet spaces where love, effort, and patience slowly do their work. If this story touched you, maybe it's because you've known what it's like to try, to stumble, and to keep going anyway. And maybe, like Derek, you're learning that being not perfect doesn't mean you're not enough. Stories like this remind us that healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it comes in pieces that we have to put back together, one gentle note at a time. The music doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. It just has to be real. In a world that often measures worth by perfection, Derek and Aubrey's story teaches us something different. It shows us that love isn't about having all the answers or fixing everything that's broken. It's about showing up, even when you're scared. It's about trying, even when you fail. It's about choosing to rebuild, even when the foundation feels shaky. Their journey from silence to song, from broken to healing, reminds us that family isn't defined by the walls that surround us or the things that we own. It's defined by the moments we choose to stay, to fight, to love fiercely even when everything feels like it's falling apart. Clara's garden of butterflies serves as a perfect metaphor. Beautiful things can emerge from cocoons of struggle. What looks like an ending might just be a transformation waiting to happen. Derek didn't become a perfect father overnight. The trailer didn't become a mansion. Aubrey didn't magically heal from all her pain. But they became enough. They became safe. They became home. And sometimes, that's the most profound victory of all. The music box still sits on that shelf, a reminder that broken things can sing again. That melodies can be restored, even if they're not quite the same as before. Sometimes the imperfect songs are the most beautiful ones, because they carry the weight of the journey it took to create them. This story isn't just about a father and daughter finding their way back to each other. It's about all of us who've ever felt like we weren't enough, who've ever worried that our love couldn't bridge the gaps that life had carved between us and the people we care about most. It's about social workers like Ms. Bennett, who have to make impossible decisions with limited information, trying to balance protection with compassion. It's about volunteers like Clara, who choose to see potential where others see problems, who offer homes to hearts that need healing. It's about the neighbors who watch from their windows, sometimes with judgment, sometimes with care. It's about systems that are imperfect but trying, communities that are flawed but fighting, and individuals who refuse to let circumstances define their capacity for love. In the end, Derek and Aubrey's story is proof that healing doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. It requires showing up for the people we love, even when we don't have all the answers. It requires believing that tomorrow can be different from yesterday, even when today feels impossible. The forget-me-nots in Clara's garden bloom every spring now, a testament to the fact that some things, once planted with care, continue to grow long after the original planting is forgotten. Love, like those flowers, has a way of surprising us with its resilience. So here's to the Derek Mitchells of the world, the single parents fighting battles that no one sees, the ones who go to bed worried and wake up determined. Here's to the Aubreys, the children who swallow their pain because they're trying to protect the adults they love. And here's to the Claras, the helpers who show up not because they have to, but because they choose to. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest acts of love happen in the smallest moments. A hand on a head, a song hummed in the hallway, a note tucked into a pocket. These are the things that build homes, that create safety, that transform silence into song. If you're listening to this story and you recognize yourself in any of these characters, know this: you're not alone. Whether you're the parent struggling to keep it all together, the child learning to trust again, or the helper extending a hand to someone who needs it, your story matters. The music might be broken for now. The melody might be imperfect. But it's still music. It's still beautiful. It's still worth playing. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. The story doesn't end with that gentle click of the door. It continues in every choice Derek makes to show up for his daughter, in every smile Aubrey offers to the world, in every act of kindness Clara extends to the next family that needs her help. It continues in you, in me, in all of us who choose to believe that broken doesn't mean worthless, that imperfect doesn't mean impossible, and that love, even when it's messy and complicated and hard, is always worth fighting for. So keep fixing those music boxes, even when the gears are rusty and the springs are weak. Keep planting those forget-me-nots, even when the soil seems too hard. Keep showing up, keep trying, keep loving. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. And sometimes, it's everything. Thanks for listening to this story of quiet courage, of love that rebuilds, and of music that never really stops playing, even when we can't hear it for a while. If it moved you, if it reminded you of your own journey, if it gave you hope for tomorrow, then it's done what it was meant to do. Remember, you are enough. Your love is enough. Your efforts, even the imperfect ones, matter more than you know. Until next time, keep listening for the music. It's always there, waiting to be heard again.